Hello and welcome. Welcome back to my live streams. I haven't live streamed in a while. Deep Noetics is back. So, I am thinking of moving on a little bit with my topics. I'm still going to be speaking on topics related to technology and power as they're related to most of the things you can talk about, specifically when I'm streaming on a modern technologized platform. I will always make references to technology, always make references to power. But I'd like to get more into something esoteric. And esoteric must not necessarily mean weird or, I don't know, loopy, strange. But it does mean something that is interior, that pertains to the interior, that is not exteriorized, that cannot be accessed on a surface level, so to say. And that's exactly what I want to get into in this session as an introductory session to it. But moving on in the further live streams down the line, I will be providing for a more esoteric, more hidden, more mystical approach to a lot of philosophies that we can speak of. And that is obviously very related to the notion of power, as power is often understood, specifically in a conspiratorial sense, understood as an esoteric cult of control that excludes the majority of people into an exoteric sphere, into a shallow sphere of subservience. Now, what exactly do these terms mean? It's obviously not easy to properly delineate them. However, as the terms imply, we're speaking of an interior and exterior sphere. Specifically, when talking about religions, we may have an interior sphere. In the Abrahamic religions, for example, we have mystical traditions such as the Kabbalah. In Judaism, we have mystical traditions such as Sufism in Islam, and also older traditions like Gnosticism in Christianity. And going on further from that, we also have mystical traditions, esoteric traditions in Hindu religions, such as the Upanishad traditions, or Buddhism, which can be seen as a return to an esoteric core that was lost in Hindu traditions. Keeping in mind that Hinduism never necessarily referred to themselves as such, but was a term denoted for the various cults, the various collections of cults and religious sects found in the area of colonial India at the time when these cults were studied. Furthermore, we've got alchemical traditions throughout the Middle Ages. The slideshow you may be seeing right here are various imageries from alchemical texts, and the meaning of which has been analyzed and worked through by Carl Gustav Jung in his studies of alchemy and philosophy, or his deeper works such as the book titled Mysterium Conjunctionis, The Mystery of the Conjunction, The Mystery of the Coincidence of Opposites, the Coincidentia Oppositorum. The coincidence of opposites, specifically and most prominently the coincidence of the mental and the spiritual sphere, are what have been discovered as a mystery by the ancients, and that mystery has been carried through these mystical religious traditions, but specifically also through mystical philosophical traditions such as Platonism or Neoplatonism, Platonism representing a kind of Western esotericism, but also allegedly being influenced by various traditions, such as traditions from ancient Egypt, ancient Babylon, and ancient India. Specifically, the Neoplatonist Iamblichus focused on explaining and extracting the deeper sense of the mysteries of ancient Egypt. Moreover, we've got Plutarch focusing on the mystery of Isis and Osiris, that representing the core esoteric mystery that lies at the heart of all of the exoteric cults of the various and diverse deities that ancient Egypt worshipped at the time. What the Neoplatonists, such as Iamblichus, strove to achieve was a philosophical foundation, a metaphysics and ontology of these religious and spiritual and mystical traditions. Meaning they would draft a kind of framework, a hierarchy for the world and for the position of God and the gods. Let me just turn on the light. Or not. That's better. Yeah. So, the mystical traditions speak of a core hierarchy, a common core that is the hypothesis underlying mysticism, is that there is a perennial core, a common core from which the various aspects of reality emerge. For example, the various deities emerge as various faces of the same underlying core deity. For example, you had in Zoroastrianism, in the Avesta religion, the assumption that all of the good deities, all of the good deities were faces of Ahura Mazda, of the god of light, and all of the bad deities were only various faces of the one bad god, Ahriman. So essentially, you had a moral theology, a moral philosophy of light and darkness that was the framework that would explain the various aspects of polytheistic religions at the time in the Persian Empire. In the same way, Iamblichus was attempting to bring order into the system of gods by understanding them as various aspects of the same underlying principle, the underlying deity. That underlying deity was almost impossible to grasp, so it unfolded for us humans to be understood in these mythical stories, such as the story of Isis and Osiris and their union into bringing forward their child Horus and the fight against Seth. And on the other hand, in a metaphysical ontology. In a metaphysical ontology where God, the creator God, also understood as the demiurge, is at the top, not to be mistaken or confused with the way the Gnostics understood the demiurge as a false impostor and essentially evil deity, but the demiurge being a rather neutral deity that is at the peak of creation, that is in charge of bringing forward the manifestations of eternal principles and spiritual ideas. So what you have is essentially a hierarchy with God at the top, and then the gods, the multitude of gods emanating from God and being split into two categories, one being the archons and one being the daemons. The archons are those which are eternal and perfect and unchanging. Those archons go beyond our temporally limited and physically limited material bodies and material selves. The principles they convey, the ideas they have, or the omens they bring are beyond human comprehension. They go beyond the needs and desires that we have and are essentially not understandable, not graspable for us. In more recent theologies, specifically of established religions, they could be understood as something like the angels. The second category, the daemons, are those that are more directly involved in material life, that are more directly banished into the material realm as us mortals are, and they engage with the world in various forms, not as the archons do, holding together the fabric of the world, holding together the fabric of reality, so to say, but rather interacting with the world in various means that resemble more closely our personal lower drives and wills. For example, engaging in help, but also trickery, engaging in positive as well as negative aspects, and being ever changing and elusive as the material world, and not unchanging and eternal like the world of the archons. So, in that sense, we're having the most ancient mystical approaches at resolving this tension between the unchanging world, the spiritual world, and the ever-changing material world. It is an attempt at a reconciliation of the opposites in this oneness, in the oneness of the one that Neoplatonists, or specifically the founder of Neoplatonism, Plotinus, focuses on. He focuses on the one. His philosophy is centered around the one. So the alchemists were those that carried on the tradition of this mystery, rather than subscribing to the established theology that was later solidified in Western Christian scholasticism. They would be continuing the pursuit of the reconciliation of opposites, the pursuit that can be potentially traced back to the question of the unity of thinking and being of Parmenides. And if you understand the question that Parmenides asked on its more original sense, not the sense that thinking is being in a sort of pure bland identification, even not engaging in a kind of Hegelian reconciliation, Hegelian Aufhebung, but actually engaging it in its original sense. This original sense can be, for example, explored in Martin Heidegger's text Moira on Parmenides' notion of the union of thinking and being, where essentially thinking and being are not identified in a pure logical identification as we would assume in our use of the language today, but rather they emerge as aspects, as faces of an underlying unity that is prior to thinking and being, and thus inaccessible. This priorness, this kind of escape and elusiveness of that concept can be also found in Heidegger's notion of the Ereignis, or the event. The Ereignis, he says, is an Enteignis. The event is a dispossession at the same time. The event assembles its aspects, it assembles thinking and being, but the event itself withdraws. This assembly is at once a withdrawal of that which assembles, thus ever remaining inaccessible, and thus the secret remaining secret in essence. So that is the crucial core of the mysticism, that there is a phenomenal aspect to the essential secret, to that which is essentially unknown, to that which cannot be accessed by its very nature, its core concept being the inaccessibility. So in that sense, the inaccessibility is the core mystery, but it is at the same time even though it is not accessible, it is the trajectory that the mystic strives to dig into, strives to attain and achieve. And so we are met with this conundrum. We are met with this conundrum of requiring the unity, requiring the oneness to make sense of the world, requiring the assumption that there is the good, that there is the truth, in order to meaningfully pursue that truth. Yet at the same time, that truth, that oneness, withdrawing from us each time. It is a blessing and a curse, so to say. It approaches us by inviting us to study it, and it leaves us, it departs from us as soon as we do. And there are various traditions then to look at here. You can look at the perennial traditions, specifically perennial traditionalist positions. Famously, you've got Aldous Huxley as a recent example, historically recent example. You've got people like Schuon or René Guénon that have looked into this. But also more ancient mystics. You've got Sufi or Islamic mystics. You've got mystics such as Al-Ghazali. You've got Mullah Sadra. You've got Ibn Arabi. You've got various Islamic mystics. You've got various Hellenistic mystics like the Neoplatonists. Hellenistic and Roman mystics like the Neoplatonists. You'd also get Christian mystics. You get people like Bonaventura. You get Meister Eckhart. You also get romanticists, people of the Romantic age. You got alchemists such as Paracelsus or Albertus Magnus. You also get more recent occult traditions, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry. Got a comment here from Stephen. Good to see you, Stephen. Blavatsky. Yeah, that's an example. I mean, all of this occultism engages in that sphere. However, the problem is with these people is that they also use the mystique. I wanna distinguish between mysticism and mystique. They use the mystique to their advantage. They use their mystique to exert a kind of power, nimbus of power, in a sense that by having a performative stance of owning the skills of attaining possession or knowledge of the mysterious unity, but at the same time conveying that they are remarkable for that fact, that ordinary people do not have that access, and ordinary people ought to admire them for that access. Through that mystique, they engage in manipulation. They engage in an attempt of gaining power. And that is an essential part of this whole mystical tradition, of this whole esoteric-exoteric distinction. It is the question of, is it something that only a selected elite has access to? Is it something that only a selected elite should have access to? And so, in that sense, there was often the attempt at leveraging the access to mystical traditions as a means to exerting power, as a means to exerting at least ideological power in the sense of power that is wielded through ideas, that is wielded through impressions, ideas, thoughts, or semantic systems. If you want to go with a systemic theory approach, such as Luhmann's approach. So what we're getting at here is the question of the unique access to the esoteric realm, the unique access, the direct experience of the phenomenon of being attainable through accepting and engaging the void of the secret, this void that you encounter when seeking for the secret as the secret withdraws, and this acceptance of this nothingness and the reconciliation with the truth, with the one, with the unity of the world through this bold acceptance, this bold facing of the void. It is also something that is echoed in other traditions outside of the West. Of course, we've got Taoism, we've got Zen heavily focused on the circle, on the nothingness, and thus focused on going beyond the rationality of thought. That is very crucial because, especially in the Western world, it has become difficult to conceptualize any sort of tradition that goes beyond the rationality of thought, that goes beyond a kind of calculating, mathematical, logical consistency thinking, and goes more towards a practice, goes more towards an actual art of living. The ancient Greeks, they still had that connection to an art of living. They still had a kind of unity of theory and practice because it was seen as honorable if a man lived and died according to their philosophy. There was no other way of being a philosopher other than living according to your philosophy. And that meant true commitments. That didn't mean like being an academic and all academics being, similar in their ivory towers, and one academic just kind of preferring this one theory and the other one preferring the other theory, and everyone just kind of engaging in this annoying circle jerk with no real sense to it, but an actual dedication, to the particular way of life, and up until death. That's the fulfillment. That's the utmost horizon of your Dasein, the utmost horizon of your being in the world is death. That which is never attained, that which is just like the mystical secret, it is always there. You are pursuing it in a sense. You are always approaching death, but you never attain it because once it is there, the you that attains it is no longer there either. So, a true philosophy in that sense would be something like Diogenes. If Diogenes rejects civilization, rejects the modern way of life, rejects, having a kitchen, cooking your food, or at least a fire to cook your food, then him dying of a food poisoning infection from eating raw chicken is very suitable to him, especially if he dies somewhere outside without any clothes on and without his home. In the same sense, you've got the tragedy poet Aeschylus, who wrote the famous Prometheus Unbound. Aeschylus was known to reject prophecies, and he decided to sit outside and contemplate and make a point of sitting outside after it was predicted he would die from something falling from the heavens. And he ended up dying from this type of bird that picks up turtles to crack their shells on a rock. And instead of a rock, they used his head, and he died. And that was honorable. In the same sense, Thales was honorable for dying whilst contemplating the stars and the heavens and falling into a well. All of this is good. It's honorable. It's people who have died in alignment to their philosophy. And that is exactly where the theory and practice are not divorced. And this is something that has become so difficult. With the philosophies and ideologies you have now, it's become difficult. You've got political philosophies, and even they have become futile. You take famously leftism. Famously, you get leftism. Leftism, you could say, is the last deep, philosophically grounded political program that directly calls for some sort of political action. And all the reactions to it, in my view, all of the, you could say, establishment or reactionary or conservative reactions to it are usually reactive. They often haven't developed a kind of philosophy on their own. They do usually in individual parts, but oftentimes they are disparate, isolated philosophies that would advocate for an opposition to leftism, but it's not a singular tradition like leftism is, but rather the remnants of a tradition that leftism has kind of attempted to deconstruct and take apart. So if someone opposes leftism from a Christian perspective, then they're kind of defending that Christianity that's been left in their particular surrounding and their particular upbringing and family, but it's not necessarily a philosophy or a version of philosophically grounded Christian defense that is widely represented by a tradition in society anymore. Just as an example, there's various other forms of reactionary critique of leftism, but that is just one example. But in leftism, you have this prime example of a philosophy that's ended up becoming a kind of expedient recreation for academics. One that generates papers, one that generates some sort of academic credentials, but that's one that's no longer, that's entirely impotent to any practice, to any change, to any real action, to any way of life, right? Exactly. So I've kind of come off track here. I should probably structure this better. So essentially what I'm getting at is we are entering a new kind of conundrum, one where our philosophical traditions that have kind of maintained the power structure of separating the esoteric from the exoteric, these have kind of come apart. We used to have a kind of a esoteric exoteric sphere very clearly seen in something like the Catholic Church. You had a very kind of different, sophisticated form of Christianity that was being discussed at the councils, at the synods, at the various disputations between bishops, between cardinals. However, when it came to the exoteric Christianity that was lived by the average regular peasant, it was a very different one. It was a very different one that clung to a particular ritual, that clung to the fear of hell, that clung to particular dogmas, and had often divorced itself from a direct access with the divine, from an esoteric connection to the unity of the divine. This seems to have been fallen apart, not in the sense that we've all attained access to the divine, and that is something that people like Meister Eckhart, or even people like Leibniz, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, would have advocated for. That is something like the capacity of each one of us to becoming prophets, of each one of us to attaining a connection to the divine. This has not taken place, but rather in a profanization, so to say, and making imminent, making unholy of the entire sphere, meaning that there is no longer an esoteric sphere available, but rather all of us have become exoteric, including the elites. The elites have become proles, as Bernard Stiegler would proclaim. They have become proletariized. And that is not exactly true, as these categories, as I've already said, the futility of leftism is shown here. These categories don't apply anymore. In a way, we've all become proles, and in a way we've all become bourgeoisie. Neither of these categories fully apply anymore. But what has happened is that we are all in the exoteric sphere, and we are all approaching a kind of a technocratic nihilism. A nihilism, an emptiness, a nothingness that is encroaching on us And thus, it is a nothingness that we cannot escape, but with the lack of an esoteric access to the nothingness within, we get overwhelmed by it. Carl Jung said that those waters that the experienced may swim in, the inexperienced shall drown. And this is exactly the sentiment I'd like to give you guys, that we are approaching an emptiness that can only be reconciled from within. The solutions are not outside. Except ironically me. Watch my live stream and you'll get the solution. Subscribe and like. Jokes aside. The reconciliation of the nothingness that is approaching us can only be performed from within. And that is, as Stephen Miller puts it, the total opposite of fake it till you make it. That is the exact opposite. Because that is something nobody can fake. Just like you cannot fake or inauthentically approach your own death. At the moment of death, you are individualized. You are yourself. You cannot escape. You cannot be anyone else. Once you approach the darkness, once you approach the void approaching us in the technological age, you cannot be inauthentic. You yourself are actually facing it and can only do so from within. All right. This was it for my first session to get back into the live streaming. I will continue this weekly or bi-weekly depending on my schedule. I'll attempt to do it weekly. However, there will be certain weeks where I won't have time and I'll just skip that week. If you want to support my work, follow my Substack, become a paid member. I'm going to be publishing very exciting work upcoming soon. I'm working on it right now. And also, if you want to learn more about power, learn more about technology, all of which is featuring into my work on this channel, you'll find the links to the courses I've done below, where you can support my work, but also get some high quality education for it. Other than that, I wish you a wonderful evening and thank you for tuning in. See you next time.